Welcome back, teachers. You are watching The Better Teacher. So far in this season, we've discussed a lot of topics like experiential learning, peer assessment, critical thinking, neurodiversity. And with us, we have G. Balasubramanian, the former director of academics, who's been answering all these questions for us. Thank you for all these answers,
Thank you,
sir.
Varsha.
So, in this episode, we will be discussing the pace of learning versus the pace of teaching.
Okay.
Is there a mismatch between the pace of learning and pace of teaching today, sir?
Well, I think it has always been, it's not the gift of today, because the opportunities of learning has been multiplying day in and day out. The way the teaching happened, that was on a little slow motion, not only now, for years and years together. If you see the way that the evolution of knowledge has happened, the speed of evolution has been not conditioned by time. But then when it comes to teaching, that somebody has to acquire that knowledge, cognize that knowledge, capsulate that knowledge, and deliver that knowledge. So the process of encapsulation, processing, and delivery has its own time. Therefore, the opportunities of learning are much more, and the speed with which a person can learn is far better as compared to the pace of learning that happens. So it's a very natural phenomena. But then over a period of time, depending upon the social evolution, scientific changes, technological innovations, this has increased a lot at this point of time.
With that, now that we know that there's a gap between the pace of learning and teaching, what are the modern opportunities that can be used to bridge this gap?
See, with the kind of innovations, with the kind of information flow that has happened over 100 years recently, that has been remarkable as compared to the previous several centuries. Therefore, the compulsion of the human on the part of the human being to learn has been, very, very significant. Therefore, to wait for someone to come and teach you what has happened, or to wait for an institutional intervention to enhance your knowledge, that is disappearing. The focus today is on self-learning and self-paced learning and self-directed learning. And I think with that, there are no options to that. Whether you are a teacher, whether you are a student, or whether you are a worker in any other profession, self-learning, self-paced learning, and self-directed learning are the answers for the changes that's happening in the future.
It's an interesting thing you just mentioned, sir. You spoke of self-learning and self-directed learning. Is this a mismatch that is there to bridge the gap, or is it just happening naturally?
I wouldn't call it a mismatch, but what happens is when one engages with the self-learning, they look at what others are doing, and therefore they tend to engage in those items of learning, those subjects of learning which others also engage. They fail to understand what they need, what their priorities are, what their aptitudes are. Therefore, with self-learning, there's every possibility of wastage in learning, wastage of time, and selection of wrong directions happening. So once you are clear, what's your aptitude, what is the direction in which you want to grow, you need to restrain your process of learning, pathways of learning to that particular mode. And then once you know the direction in which you are going, and you can articulate your learning in that given way, and then you can pace your learning to the requirements depending on your time, depending on your aptitude and all others, because every learning has to be stress-free, right? In case you want to push something into your brain, it doesn't happen, it only creates stress. So today, with lots of tools coming through, you find that you can learn from anywhere you are present. We talk about anywhere learning today, any place learning today, and I think therefore we can learn very nicely, independent of time and space. Last but not the least, never push yourself to, uh, to a learning which you think will happen overnight. Speed thrills but kills, not only on the road but even in your learning.
Sir, I think we discussed the same thing in the previous episode that we shot for the Better Teacher, where we discussed about self-learning and self-directed learning. Though both of them are used commonly in the same sentence, is there a difference between the both of them?
Yes, there is a mild difference in that. When you say the self-paced learning, it's called, in the early days, it was called a programmed learning, right? You program your learning to in several minuscules and capsules so that you are able to consolidate your learning and then progress in a systemic way. That could be done even by an institution, program learning. But when it comes to self-paced learning, you are your own master. You make your own choices. You take responsibility for your learning. And therefore, there is nothing called success or failure in learning because you know where you are going and at what speed you have to go. Therefore, there's not much of a difference, but self-paced learning throws a lot of light on taking responsibility for your learning.
I think, yes, now that we have a lot of platforms, we're discussing that again in the previous episode, where we have a lot of platforms, so it can be ChatGPT, Gemini, or any AI tool. I think there is information available across where self-learning is happening. It can be out of curiosity that the children and maybe teachers also these days learn. It can be for the information, gaining information, or just out of curiosity. Is there a way to navigate through this?
Yes, that's the biggest challenge today we have on navigation of knowledge, right? It's not the availability of knowledge that matters. A few centuries before, decades before, the problem was acquisition of knowledge. Today, the gateways for acquisition of knowledge have multiplied like anything. And therefore, the problem is on what do we learn, how do I learn, how much I should learn, and then what for I am learning. Is that so? Navigation has become very important. Navigation goes with responsibility. Navigation goes with ethical compulsions. Navigation goes with a social welfare. Therefore, there are many cases where wrong choices have resulted in the demolition of their dreams. And therefore, I think we have to educate our people on making right choices. And I think the future is about right choices. And if I were to conclude on that, I must say in the earliest days, they said the objective of education was to enhance the power of viveka. Viveka means the power of reasoning. I think that exactly relates today. We need to enhance the power of reasoning.
Correct, sir. Teachers, I think it's a very valid point because both teachers, anybody across the globe now has a lot of information that is freely accessible. I think it's ultimately the reasoning and correctly comprehending what it is to use the information in the right manner. With that, I have one last question, sir, just out of curiosity. Now that we've established that there might be gaps because of all the information available, what can teachers do to make sure that they reduce this gap in the classrooms?
See, all that what you need is to provide a buffet of experiences, a buffet of learning opportunities, so that, as I said, the children will take the gateway they want. They will consume knowledge to the extent they want. In all learning, the most important thing, as I said, is the comfort in learning and the enjoying learning that matters. So teachers should not push knowledge, should not push information, but should expose the children to the opportunities available and let them make their choices. Let them celebrate knowledge to the extent they want.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. Teachers, I think we've understood that knowledge is available to us across. So it is our duty to make sure that we help our children explore that knowledge available in the right direction. Perfect. Thank you so much for answering these questions for us.
Nice.
Dear teachers, with this we come to the end of this season of The Better Teacher. In case you have any more topics that you want us to discuss and you want Bala sir to answer, please drop a comment and we'll take it forward in the next season. Thank you for staying with us this whole season. Stay tuned for more.